In this very in-depth forecast, the Central Plains are currently being monitored for a tornado outbreak, as discrete to semi-discrete storms will be capable of multiple strong to potentially violent long-track tornadoes, widespread massive hail upwards of 4-inch to even greater, and widespread significant wind gusts greater than 70 miles per hour. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 25th of 2024. For today, we do have a moderate risk for the Central Plains for central Oklahoma into northern Texas. The majority of southern into central and southeastern Kansas into portions of southern and southwestern Missouri here. Risks for today do include a 15% tornado risk for the moderate risk region, where we are going to see the possibility for multiple strong and potentially violent tornadoes. We are expected to see a tornado outbreak today for the Central Plains, and this is going to be the primary thing that we are going to cover in today's forecast. If you do live in any of the affected areas, please stay with alert for the time being. There is a PDS tornado watch, which means particularly dangerous situation, which is an upper echelon tornado watch, meaning that strong to violent tornadoes are possible. Again, a tornado outbreak is expected for today for the 15% tornado risk region. So please definitely make sure you're staying weather alert if you live in the affected region. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 45% for eastern Kansas into northeastern Oklahoma in southern and southwestern Missouri. This will likely be more so detached to the storms that are going to be across Oklahoma and Texas, where we could see the potential for a little bit more of a linear setup that may develop into Kansas, that some of the NAM 3-kilometer CONUS model runs have been indicating, but more on that will be later. For our hail risk, we do have a dual 45% risk for large hail, one for central into southern and Kansas and northern Oklahoma, as well as southern Oklahoma and northern Texas, where we are expected to see widespread massive hailstones greater than 2 inches across this region. So definitely another big risk for hail for today. For day 2 outlook tomorrow, we do have a really broad enhanced risk for southern Illinois, southern Indiana, Kentucky, northern Tennessee into central Tennessee, and eastern Missouri. Risks for tomorrow do include a 10% tornado risk with the possibility of strong tornadoes, though we are monitoring for potentially higher tornado possibilities, but definitely make sure you're staying weather alert if you do live in the affected region for southeastern Missouri, northwestern Tennessee, western Kentucky, and southern Illinois. For damaging wind risk, we do have a broad 30% with the possibility of widespread significant damaging wind gusts that are going to be greater than 70 miles per hour, as well as a 30% hail risk with the possibility of some significant hailstones greater than 2 inches as well. For day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the eastern seaboard for Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and North Carolina, where we could see the potential for some upcoming scattered severe thunderstorms. Then for day 4, day 8 outlook, we currently don't have anything issued. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast for today, we do have a slight risk for eastern Kansas, northeastern Oklahoma, northern Arkansas, western into central Missouri, extending into portions of eastern Missouri as well, and southeastern Nebraska, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding, as well as a couple additional marginal risks, one for Pennsylvania into Maryland and northern West Virginia, as well as a marginal risk for portions of the southeast for southern North Carolina, coastal regions of South Carolina, southern Georgia into central and southern Alabama, and portions of Mississippi and northern Florida, where we could see the potential for some isolated flash flooding. For tomorrow, we do have a pretty broad slight risk for Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, portions of eastern Missouri, Tennessee, almost the entirety of Kentucky, it seems, and West Virginia, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding for tomorrow. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a pretty small slight risk for eastern Pennsylvania into New York, just to the north of the New York City metro region into portions of northern New Jersey there, where we could see some scattered flash flooding, with a pretty broad marginal risk that covers the entirety of the New England corridor into portions of the Ohio River Valley for eastern Ohio, eastern Tennessee, even down into the eastern half of Tennessee, in Kentucky, as well as across Appalachia, as well across the Appalachian Mountains, as well as some for some isolated flash flooding that could be possible for both portions of Michigan and portions of Wisconsin as well. Taking a look at our weather models, we are going to be doing something a little bit different for this video. We are going to be using the high resolution ensemble forecast system instead of our regular HRRR on our Radar Omega. Any other model parameters that aren't included on the high resolution ensemble, we will go to Pivotal Weather to look at those, but I do want to try and use the high resolution ensemble forecast for today, because I think it's a extremely handy tool and really puts together what is probably going to be the main solution as far as what's going to go down as far as the pattern of our weather systems and stuff, because it's averaging basically all of our convective allowing models, and it's overall just an extremely good tool, and I really love it. So we're going to start off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, but as far as our surface observation goes, we do have a surface load that is somewhere around here in Kansas, or it could potentially be further down south into the Oklahoma Panhandle. We also do have a warm front that is slowly working its way northward, and that is allowing for a stream of moisture to just stream into this region, and that is definitely going to be needed to support our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, as not too long ago we did have a cold front that did blow through, and that kind of led to the moisture being completely cleared out for today. So the moisture in Oklahoma today went from the low 50s, low mid 50s, all the way into the low 70s across this region. So that stream of moisture definitely helps quite a lot, but there was some uncertainty with moisture return. We also do have a dry line that is setting up across Oklahoma in the Texas Panhandle. Some storms have already begun to form across southern Oklahoma and northern Texas here. We are still waiting on initiation further to the north in central and northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas, which it may take a little bit longer in southern Kansas as that warm front has to continue pushing off north. However, storms will be able to fire along that dry line and potentially even the warm front as well. However, we do have a pretty strong 500 millibar jet here. The reason it did change just then because I was on 700 millibars by accident, but as far as 500 millibar goes, we do have a pretty powerful 500 millibar jet that is pushing out of the southwest here. That is going to support our risk for severe thunderstorms and support our lift. There's not really much as far as defluence. There's not really too much noticeable defluence across this region. It all seems pretty zonal across this region. It does look like we may have a couple embedded short waves here with flow that is going to be locally greater in some regions. I'll definitely have to watch those short waves. As far as our isobars go, no noticeable short waves, except for the area of low pressure where storms actually do begin forming. But we do have some pretty strong 500 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 65 knots to potentially even some isolated 70 knots that are going to be backing our storms, and that's definitely going to be able to support our lift for severe thunderstorms and support quite a lot of speed shear across this region and support the risk for hail as well. And when it's put into comparison with our dry line here, you can see that it is almost perfectly perpendicular to our initiating boundary, so our storms are expected to be isolated to semi-isolated for today. Taking a look at our 700 millibar winds in our low-level jet and how that's going to affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes for today, we are expected to see a pretty powerful low-level jet. However, it does come with some uncertainty, as our storms are expected to be around here by now, and our low-level jet isn't too terribly strong ahead of our storms, as you can clearly see there. We do have some really strong 700 millibar winds, a really strong low-level jet that is going to be backing our storms, at least with 700 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 45 to potentially 50 knots across this region. Definitely going to support quite a lot of directional shear and the risk for tornadoes. However, the position of this low-level jet is definitely going to be potentially a little bit more of a limiting factor and lead to quite a lot of uncertainty. There is a little bit of uncertainty in place for some things, and that's kind of preventing this from being upgraded to a high risk. We did almost have a day 2 high risk yesterday. However, models have been somewhat downtrending, and more uncertainty has become more realized across this region, and the low-level jet is definitely a big uncertainty for me because picture a supercell here. Let me just kind of draw a rough image of a supercell. This isn't what our supercells are probably going to look like. The photograph may be different, but whenever we have a low-level jet that is backing our storms, it's not really going to do much. It's kind of just going to slide past our storms, potentially even weaken our RFD that may be trying to stream out of the west. However, if our low-level jet is ahead of our storms, that will likely support a whole lot more inflow, as we will be able to have some pretty strong flow out of the south-southwest that will be able to be taken in as inflow whenever we get a strong RFD going and get that mass response. So if we don't have a strong low-level jet ahead of our storms, I don't really think that we'll see too much of a tornado risk if our low-level jet is going to be back behind our storms. So we'll definitely have to watch that. That's definitely a pretty big uncertainty for me. And if storms do miss our low-level jet, we could definitely see a much lower risk for tornadoes. But again, that's a pretty big uncertainty for me for today. But tornadoes do seem to be pretty plausible regardless, with some pretty decently strong directional shear pretty much all over the place. Taking a look at our 200 millibar winds and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, with the spreading of our wind vectors, as well as how our speed shear is going to affect our risk for hail across this region. We already have a pretty strong 500 millibar jet out of the south-southwest, which is going to support quite a lot of decent speed shear across this region. And on top of that's going to be our 200 millibar winds with a strong jet out of the south-southwest, with flow at upwards of 100 knots across this region, the low 100 knots, and potentially even approaching the low 100 teens, just a little bit to the west. That's going to be feeding into this region. That will definitely support quite a lot of strong speed shear on top of our strong 500 millibar flow. Definitely be able to support the risk for some pretty widespread and some pretty significant hail across this region. Definitely think that potentially upwards of 3 to maybe even 4 inches may be possible across this region. As far as the spreading of our wind vectors go, we already saw on our high resolution ensemble forecast, but we don't really have that much noticeable defluence across this region. We do have a little bit of defluence. However, I don't really see it really doing too much across this region. In fact, it does look like our wind vectors may be taking the same path, and there may not really be much defluence, if any at all. Taking a look at our stormlets of Felicity and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, you can clearly see where our low-level jet and our directional shear may be severely mistimed with our storms. And again, that's going to be a extreme uncertainty for me at least. You can see where it's a little bit more messier as what is typically picked up whenever storms are currently ongoing on our models, and we hardly have really that much strong directional shear ahead of our storms, with stormlet to Felicity values that are getting upwards of 100, the mid 100s, potentially an isolated 200, maybe even approaching the mid 200s and the low 300s. Something I do want to note about the high resolution ensemble forecast is because it is an ensemble, it is typically a little bit more conservative and doesn't really show the true parameters. It is definitely a little bit more conservative, but it's still an extremely good tool, as it shows where our models are agreeing and generally how our models are agreeing as far as our different parameters. But you can already tell that the majority of our directional shear is expected to be back further off to the west behind our storms, which, as I talked about previously, may not be the best for tornadic development. So again, we will definitely have to watch that because we could definitely have a significantly lowered risk for tornadoes if our low-level jet is mistimed and further off to the west. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of bulk shear across this region, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of the widespread 60 to potentially even approaching the 70 and even 80 knots in some regions that are going to be surrounding and backing our storms. This is definitely going to be pretty strong as far as bulk shear goes, and definitely going to be pretty supportive of the possibility of some widespread hail that is definitely going to be significant. Again, I definitely think that potentially upwards of 3 to 4 inch hail is definitely possible for today across this region. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity for our various models, one good thing that I like about our high resolution ensemble forecast is their handy tool where you can look at the composite reflectivity for our various models and compare what they say about storm coverage, storm mode, and all those various things. So starting off with the ACRRR, which is what I'm going to use for the baseline for today, the ACRRR is indicating some pretty discrete storms that are going to be semi-discrete, probably because there's just going to be so many across this region. Not really too much development that's going to be going on in Kansas, indicated by the Oklahoma, indicated by the ACRRR. We may get a supercell or two that could fire up into Kansas. However, these storms are definitely going to be fairly isolated to semi-discrete, and they will definitely be able to support the potential for tornadoes across this region. Again, strong to even violent tornadoes are possible for today. And something I do want to note is this is another uncertainty for me. We have a successful left split indicated by our ACRRR here, indicating that the environment may be prone to left splitting cells across this region, which could lead to some more mergers, but overall may be more impactful in a negative way to our tornado risk, and could potentially limit our risk for tornadoes across this region. However, even with those left splits, tornadoes are still possible. Again, this is still a pretty highly conducive environment, but you're already being able to tell that there is some pretty big uncertainties for today's event. And then for our various models for HRW, NSSL, not really too discrete. There's not as much coverage of storms compared to our ACRRR. We do have some more discrete storms there, and our storms are going to be a little bit more messy and Texas, indicated by our HW NSSL. HRW ARW does indicate hardly a lot of development across Oklahoma, which is in line with the HRW NSSL and the ACRRR, with a cell or two that may fire off into Kansas, but is also indicating left splits on some of these cells down into Texas. HRW FV3 does also indicate not really a whole lot of development across Kansas either, and some left splitting supercells as well across northern Texas, and a supercell or two that could fire off into Kansas. NAM Nest, which I'm pretty sure is NAM 3 kilometer, continues to show also left splits. A couple of successful mergers up into Kansas, but does show a little bit more development across Oklahoma. This is definitely more of what you don't want to see. You don't want to see more widespread storms, more discrete storms that are going to be firing off in Oklahoma, because all of those will be capable of violent tornadoes. For our ACRRR 6 hour, still indicating left splits across northern Texas as well, but also not really a whole lot of development across Oklahoma either. HRW and SSL 12 hour, a lot of the same things, some left splits in northern Texas, a couple supercells in southern Kansas, not a whole lot of development in Oklahoma. HRW ARW 12 hour shows a lot of the same things. Same with probably HRW FV3 12 hour. Yeah, a lot of the same thing. And then NAM Nest 12 hour. A little bit more in line with the NAM Nest, where there are a couple supercells that are going to fire off across Oklahoma, with a little bit more activity across Oklahoma. However, the main consensus does seem to be that there may not be as much development across Oklahoma, which could severely limit our tornado risk. But if we do get storms going, they will be capable of all hazards, including violent tornadoes. taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see quite a lot of moisture across the Oklahoma and Texas region, with dew points that are expected to get upwards of at least 70 and potentially even approaching 75 in some regions. However, that is going to be right after we did have a cold front blow through, and our moisture across Oklahoma has basically gone from the mid to low 50s all the way to some extreme dew point values in the mid 70s, which will support quite a lot of instability. However, I am a little bit skeptical about this because we had to have such a big moisture change in such a short period of time, even though we had all day for it to happen. It could lead to some less quality of moisture, some less up to par quality of moisture, and potentially less instability at the surface. However, the HRRR, or not the HRRR, the high resolution ensemble forecast is definitely showing a lot of moisture, indicating that models are agreeing pretty well at a lot of moisture return across this region. But I am a little bit skeptical, but still very, very impressive, and will definitely be supportive of quite a lot of instability across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see it get pretty warm across this region. However, that's going to be before storms really begin to fire. Storms did fire significantly earlier than previously anticipated, though. Right now, our storms are currently ongoing across northern Texas, but they did fire way ahead of schedule. So that kind of scares me as far as the low-level jet and its timing, because again, as I talked about previously, if our storms miss our low-level jet because they may be a little bit too far to the east, they may not have as great of a potential for tornadoes, which is overall greater in the long run for the citizens in the moderate risk region right now. And storms fired way ahead of schedule, so they may be missing that good low-level jet later on this afternoon, which is definitely going to be pretty good for the people living in this region. Definitely still stay weather alert. That isn't necessarily a certainty, and storms are still going to be capable of tornadoes regardless. And this is going to be a little bit more of a nocturnal event. That's where a little bit more uncertainty comes into play, because we are expected to see less temperature values. But the whole reason I stated the fact that storms did fire a little bit earlier than previously anticipated is that they are getting quite a lot of surface heating across this region, much more than previously anticipated. So we have a lot of instability across this region, included with our very great dew point values that are going to support quite a lot of instability that are fueling our storms that are currently ongoing. However, as storms continue into the afternoon hours, where they may miss that low-level jet and they lose that surface heating and have less surface instability overall, we could potentially see a lowered risk for tornadoes. We do see a lowered risk for tornadoes by the time the sun usually does set, because we lose that strong surface heating and lose a good portion of our surface instability. But again, this nocturnal pattern may potentially be a significantly limiting factor, but there's still definitely some pretty impressive things that are still indicating a pretty big tornado outbreak for today. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how this is going to affect our instability and our hail risk across this region, we are expected to see a lot of lapse rates, mainly across southern Kansas here. Lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the mid and upper 8s and even the low 9s across southern Kansas will support quite a lot of instability across this region, even though we may not have the best moisture, because the warm front is going to have a harder time extending up to this latitude, but we will definitely have quite a lot of moisture across this region. Probably not as much as across Oklahoma and northern Texas. However, we will definitely see some decent dew point values, and these lapse rates will definitely help with instability on top of that, as well as our hail risk, as well as that will allow for a broadened region for hail development, and that's why we have a 45% risk for large hail across southern Kansas and northern Oklahoma. Same for further down to the south in Texas, where we are a little bit more certain about storms firing there and being overall more widespread, as that's what models, basically all the models have been indicating for today, as you saw previously on our composite reflectivity. We will also have some weaker lapse rates, but still some pretty strong lapse rates, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the mid mid and upper 7s and even the mid 8s across southern Oklahoma and northern Texas, which will aid in our overall risk for hail and our instability across this region as well, even on top of some pretty outstanding dew point values. Taking a look at our 700 millibar humidity and how that's going to affect our convective inhibition and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms with our instability. This is a new model that I am looking at. However, I am looking at it for our elevated mixed layer. Because as of right now, I don't really think that 700 millibars temperature seems to be working for our elevated mixed layer, but I do know that our relative humidity will, because it is our moisture, but it doesn't really look like we'll see anything as far as a hardy elevated mixed layer across this region. We will definitely have some pretty decently strong transport of warm air out of the south. At least it will be a little bit drier, aloft around 700 to 500 millibars there. So that elevated mixed layer will definitely need to be overcome if it wants to support severe thunderstorms and support cloud development. However, you can see that the cap was recently broken on the sounding, as it is relatively close to our parcel trace here, but definitely a pretty thick elevated mixed layer that will need to be eroded for our storms to develop. However, that will likely lead to more explosive severe thunderstorms by the time that elevated mixed layer is broken. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of instability across this region. Again, keep in mind our high resolution ensemble forecast is typically significantly more conservative compared to our NAM 3 kilometer or our HRRR. But we do have some pretty strong most unstable cape values across this region, with most unstable cape values that are being indicated getting upwards of 450 or 4,050 across northern Texas into southern Oklahoma. And anywhere there is you see yellow is upwards of 3,000. Anywhere that you see these greens is upwards of 2,000. And anywhere where you see these light blues is upwards of 1,000. And where you see these oranges here, that's upwards of 4,000 here. So we are expected to see a lot of instability across this region that will be more than sufficient in fueling our severe thunderstorms, and will be able to fuel significant severe thunderstorms, including the possibility of strong to violent tornadoes that will be potentially long track. The potential for widespread massive hailstones upwards of DVDs are possible, as well as damaging wind gusts that are going to be potentially greater than 70 miles per hour across southern Kansas. So a lot of instability will definitely be more than sufficient in fueling our various risks and hazards. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how that's going to fuel our surface-based storms, as well as our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our storms overall. As far as our surface-based cape goes, not really too many complaints here, as it does look like the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface, and we will have more than sufficient surface-based cape in fueling our surface-based storms and the potential for tornadoes across this region. However, as far as convective inhibition goes, we have had recent uptrends in convective inhibition, which is overall greater in suppressing that risk for tornadoes across this region. We will have very weak convective inhibition across this region, indicated by our dot marks across our instability here. Where we do have a very thick cap, it is a hash here with the X's here. Further off to the north, where we do have a thicker cap, but we will have a little bit of a weak cap across this region that could be a little bit more inhibiting to storms across this region. It doesn't look like our cap is going to fully erode, and that may come as a concern with this potentially being a little bit more of a nocturnal event across Oklahoma, as we will have less surface-based instability and in turn more convective inhibition, which could suppress storm development and storm intensity. However, still very large amounts of instability regardless will be able to fuel significant severe thunderstorms. That cap may not really do too much in suppressing our severe thunderstorms, and our storms still are probably going to be absolutely insane today. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that may aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms and fueling our severe thunderstorms, it doesn't really look like we'll see too much 0 to 3 kilometer instability across the Oklahoma region, so that may not really be aiding that much in fueling our severe thunderstorms. We may see some locally higher pockets of 0 to 3 kilometer instability. That may be a little bit of an aid. However, overall, it just doesn't really look like we have much 0 to 3 kilometer instability, so I don't really expect much aid out of our extreme low levels. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate our tornado risk across this region. And this is why I'm saying that even with our main uncertainties, we still have an extremely impressive environment and an extremely conducive environment for the potential of tornadoes for today. And those minor uncertainties did prevent a high risk from happening. However, it is still certain that we have an extremely capable environment for our tornadoes. With energy helicity index values that are going off the charts in some region, even on our HRRR on pivotal weather, we have seen it go off the charts previously on our when we had the May 6th high risk, and that's the only other time I've seen energy helicity index values get this high. This is absolutely insane for energy helicity index values and heavily indicates the extreme overlap of our ingredients for tornadoes and the fact that those ingredients for our tornadoes are going to be insane across this region. Again, violent tornadoes are definitely possible, and multiple strong tornadoes are expected for today. Again, an extremely conducive environment. Even if storms may miss our strong low-level jet because they fire a little bit too early, they will still be in an extremely conducive environment for the potential of strong to violent tornadoes across this region. Again, this is a very, very scary sight to see across this region. I combined scary and sight for some reason by accident. But let's just pull up an observe sounding here. Let's see what it gives us. First thing I'm noticing is that we do have a cap in place, which is good immediately east of our storms, which may limit our updrafts a little bit. However, it's pretty weak, so when we do get an updraft going, it's going to just pretty much explode. We do have some weaker storm relative helicity values across this region with an effective inflow layer upwards of the upper 200s into the 300 meters squared to second squared of storm relative helicity and the effective inflow layer. We do have a really nice curved hodograph with a long tail indicating the potential for hail. And some really nice speed shear, but also a really nice curved hodograph, very indicative of directional shear and the potential for tornadoes across this region. Further off to the west, where it is going to be back behind our storms, I do expect our hodographs to look a little bit larger, potentially even significantly larger, where we are expected to see that the bulk of our low-level jet, but we won't see as much instability, and that may not really affect our storms too much. Here, our elevated mix layer has almost entirely broken. We do have a moist layer that does extend upwards of 850 millibars, indicating that we do have some decent moisture quality, but we also have a dew point upwards of 75 and a temperature of 79, which is leading to a insane amount of instability, upwards of 4,000 joules per kilogram across this region. The only reason that the STP across this region isn't going something like this, potentially even higher, is probably because we do have that slight capping inversion there. So it's still an insane sounding here and very, very scary to look at. Taking a look at our STP, or significant tornado parameter, and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region, or our potential for significant tornadoes, we are expected to see some pretty high significant tornado parameter values across this region. Anywhere that you see these yellows indicates upwards of 4, with even the possibility of an isolated 6 that could even be approaching 7 and even 8 in some regions. Definitely some really high significant tornado parameter values, and again, keep in mind that our high-resolution ensemble forecast is a little bit more on the conservative side and is typically less than what most models indicate, as it takes into account the lower end side of the spectrum, the lower end side of what models are forecasting. But in reality, these significant tornado parameter values are probably going to be a notch higher, potentially a couple notches, and that's definitely scary because these are still some really high significant tornado parameter values, indicating the potential for significant tornadoes and even violent tornadoes. Something that is interesting to me is that the 24-hour neighborhood probability of tornadoes, which is kind of like an SPC outlook for tornadoes based on our models here. It's kind of a machine learning thing. If you know about NATOcast on Twitter, it's sort of like that. I don't know what they do to forecast this, and I'm pretty sure that this is also a little bit more conservative, but we do have a 10%, we do have a 15% for northern Texas there, but we do have lower overall tornado probabilities being indicated by the high resolution ensemble forecast, even in some pretty conducive environments. This could definitely be the solution that is the outcome. We could definitely see a risk for tornadoes that may end up looking like this in reality, especially with our uncertainties that are in place. However, it could not happen. This is kind of what is more ideal. This is kind of what is more ideal for this risk, but that's probably not going to be the case. We are probably going to see the SPC's risk verify, and even with the environment that we looked at, our storms are probably going to be able to utilize that insane environment and support overall a greater risk for tornadoes than what you're currently looking at here. Something that I did notice here, I did look at the neighborhood probability details, which is what this is. It is indicating that what they use to calculate this is a radius of 40 kilometers, radius for the potential of a tornado being in that radius circle of 40 kilometers. That is more than double. I think more than double what the SPC uses for calculating their tornado probabilities, because I'm pretty sure the SPC uses anywhere from 20 to 25 radius circle for the probability of a tornado being in that circle. So if they did use a 25 or a 20 kilometer radius circle, I definitely think that the AAA or the high resolution ensemble forecast would definitely show a significantly higher probability for tornadoes than what is currently being shown here. That will probably be pretty much in line with what the SPC forecasts. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to affect our risk for damaging wind gusts across this region, I did pull up Radar Omega for now, so we can look at our wind gust models because I don't have them anywhere else. You can already tell that we are expected to see some pretty significant damaging wind gusts, with wind gusts that are expected to get upwards of 60 to potentially 70 and even greater miles per hour across some regions. It goes off the chart in that little area there. So definitely expected to see some pretty significant damaging wind gusts that could potentially range upwards of 70 to 80 miles per hour across this region. That will definitely be pretty concerning and pretty significant. And definitely going to see widespread damaging wind gusts as well, as we do have some pretty widespread damaging wind gusts indicated by our models here. So again, definitely some widespread damaging wind gusts that are going to be significant or possible. Taking a look at our meso-analysis page for our hail risk, starting off with our large hail parameter, we do have a very, very broad 32 for this entire area, indicating that the ingredients are definitely in place for large hail and definitely significant hail. If we look at our significant hail parameter, we do have 4 and a 3 for Oklahoma, northern Texas, and southern Kansas, definitely indicating the potential for some significant hail. For our SARS hail size, we have a very, very broad 4 inches. And there is definitely room for some areas that could potentially see upwards of maybe even 5 inches, where if we did see this graph potentially get bigger, definitely think that some of these areas could definitely be filled in with a 5-inch, as again, DVD size is definitely possible. I definitely think upwards of 3 to 4 and maybe even 5 inches is definitely possible for today as far as large hail goes. And then for our SARS hail significant hail potential, we do have a 90%, we do have a broad 80% for the entire area. We do have a 90% for southern Oklahoma and northern Texas, with a 100% for southern Oklahoma there. Guaranteed risk for significant hail across this region. Again, significant hail is definitely expected for today. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. JaxonWX did release a video recently about his storm chase in Iowa with that 115% tornado risk not too long ago that we did forecast. He does have a pretty good video about it. I suggest you check that out on his channel. The link to his channel will be in the description as always. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow on the live stream, or later today on the live stream.